Blah 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 star bomb wars diddly bum diddly star bum diddly wars bum diddly star bum diddly wars bum battles in space diddly star bomb wars bum dum diddly star bum diddly. I've got the novelization of Star Wars: The Force Awakens, and that excites me for reasons outlined in the previous video, which you can go on and click that, you get the previous video. But long story short, I just can't stop thinking about this film, and I kind of want to go through all of it and talk to you about all of it, and well, here's a good way to do that. Plus, it's an excuse to read the novelization of Star Wars: The Force Awakens, because it's just something I wanted to do. I was thinking to myself, am I going to get that book? Nah, probably not. And then I realized, yes, because I can use it to talk about the film bit by bit with you guys. And what that means is we're going to go through the whole thing. And what that means is spoilers. These are my spoiler videos about Star Wars: The Force Awakens. And you know what? I really enjoyed the film. I think it was a good film. So if you somehow haven't had the spoilers yet, don't get them from me. Go and watch the film. Because even though the spoiler stuff doesn't happen at the start of the film or at the start of the book, I'm going to assume we all know them, and I'm going to talk about stuff that happens at the start of the book through the lens of knowing the whole story, including the spoilers. So from this point forward, right, with it's spoilers now, okay? Okay. So this is nice. This is sweet. I just want to draw your attention to something that Alan Dean Foster did in the original Star Wars novelization that he wrote in 1976, I believe it came out. It opens on a prologue which is noteworthy for Star Wars fans in a number of ways. First of all, the first words in it are, "Another galaxy, another time." Now, I don't know if that's Alan Dean Foster looking at the screenplay, not suspecting that the words "a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away" are going to become amazingly iconic, and just putting them in his own words. Because because why wouldn't you imagine you could do that? Or maybe it's even like an earlier draft. Maybe that's what it said in the original screenplay, because this book is called Star Wars from the Adventures of Luke Skywalker. It's not called A New Hope, it's not called Episode 4, it's called Star Wars from the Adventures of Luke Skywalker. That's what it's called. There are another couple of things interesting about this. Remember, this book was written in 1976, the year before the film came out, and here, in the 4th paragraph, is a really interesting name. Senator Palpatine. And this intro tells you about how he became the Emperor. Now, it's a different version of the Emperor to the one that we eventually end up with. It's one who's more of a puppet of, like, evil people who work for him. But this intro is really, really interesting, and it sets up information about, like, the Republic and stuff, and then it ends from the first saga. It's, like, credited, like, this whole thing is an excerpt from the first saga, Journal of the Whills. Foster opens his new book with a brief poem, which is credited to the Journal of the Whills. Isn't that sweet? I love that. And of course people have wondered who the Whills were for a very long time, and the fan theory for the longest time was that they were the Yodas. Chapter 1. It opens, the whole book opens on a new scene that isn't in the film. And it can't really be in the film because it's not something that happens exactly, it's just thoughts running through the head of General Organa. And essentially, by going through her thoughts at the time, he basically recaps what's in the crawl at the beginning of the film, which is included a couple of pages before in the book, but it's not in book form, so he puts it in book form here. And what's interesting about that is that right here on this little tiny bit of text on the first page, straight away, we get an answer to, or at least the beginning of, like, a sort of an answer to, one of the big criticisms, or questions, depending on the way it's sort of put forward, that people have about the setup of the film, which is, if the good guys won and they're the Republic, then why, when the First Order rises up, who are just like a little band of bad guys, why do the good guys need to call themselves the Resistance? Like, what are they resisting? Like, they're in charge. Like, the Empire didn't call itself the Resistance when the rebellion started, And right here, in the opening paragraph, it actually opens on, like, a single line, but then there's the next paragraph, the New Republic stood on the verge of implosion, of destruction, of complete collapse. So according to this, if you choose to believe that this is basically correct, and I'll talk about why I think you should in a moment, at least on this one point, but according to this, the New Republic technically are in control, but they never quite sort of took off in the way they hoped to. Not everyone wanted to be made free by a destructive act, by the forceful taking over of the previous regime. That didn't suit everybody. And so the New Republic, even though it is good and it's the good guys, it's collapsing. It's almost done. It's nearly dead. Now, this being such an important part of, like, the establishing backstory of the entire film and, like, the whole franchise from now on, I personally doubt that some author, even though it's Alan Dean Foster, even though it's a known name and he's been attached to Star Wars for this long and he's a respected writer and all of this stuff, even then, I don't think they'd let one guy just run his mouth and put it front and centre, put it right at the start of the official novelisation if it wasn't basically correct. This will either be backstory that was given to him by the continuity people from, who work at Star Wars, or if he did make it up, then he'll have run it past the continuity people first and they'll have accepted it and thus essentially made it canon. Now, I'm not one of these people who's going to go around thinking that everything written in any tie-in Star Wars novel is therefore canon. That stuff about where Disney closed down the extended universe and then said from now on every tie-in thing is canon, I think that was taken the wrong way. I think that was or if that's what they wanted you to think, then that was just marketing fluff. I think what it actually is that the films are the only thing that's like proper, and the tie-in stuff, what they mean is they're going to work hard to make sure that it doesn't contradict that. So I'm not going to defend everything, even in this book, as being like what was really happening in the film, but that paragraph I think we can trust. Let me get rid of the jacket. I'm trying not to get it creased. There we go, that'll be easier. It's not until the next page, page 9, that we start the first scene that's actually in the film, which is the second scene of the book, and it's that bit where the stormtroopers are getting ready to land. It's the opening scene of the film, apart from the actual opening shot with the crawl and all that, and it's where you get tantalising little flickers, little glimpses of the new stormtroopers. Now, of course, we'd already seen them because of the marketing and so on, but if you were just watching the films, this is where it's almost like the new thing is coming online, it's flickering into life, the new era, the new continuity. Now, it's different here. In the film, they're just there and they're just about to land, we're just seeing them all lined up. In the book, he uses it to make a very clear distinction between the stormtroopers we're about to spend time with and like the clone troopers from the prequels. Maybe that's just what I took from it, but so much effort is gone to in this section to make them real people. He talks about how these guys are just acting the way any soldiers do. They're joking with each other. Sometimes they'll say something inappropriate and the others will be like, whoa, steady on there. They're checking each other's armour. They're just making sure they're all zipped up and velcroed properly. They're like real people. They're like normal soldiers. And so assuming the reader is one of those of us who haven't watched however many seasons of Clone Wars it takes before, the acting starts and you start to be able to tell Cody apart from the other clone troopers and so on. This scene goes a long way to establishing that we can forget about those synchronized CG clone troopers from the prequel trilogy and we're back to just people in suits. And of course the film did that in the next scene with that clever camera work that I was telling you about in the spoiler video, because what I was talking about there, I talked about a bit where the camera, just through trickery, just through camera work, makes you change your mind about a character, and of course I was talking about Finn. I said that he was anonymous as possible, and he really was. He was just literally exactly the same as all the other people on the screen. He had the same outfit on. And someone replied that, of course a really clever trick was when he had his helmet marked with the blood, which meant that now we could tell him apart. But I was talking about before that. I was talking about before any of that happens. The very first shots of him are done in such a way that I don't know how it works, but just by keeping him in the center, having him look around a little bit nervously, just stuff like that, we already realized before any of that happened that what we were looking at here was a stormtrooper who we like. The third scene starts up and it's our introduction to the planet of Jakku and BB-8 on Jakku in particular. Now, I was a little bit disappointed by this, not because there was anything particularly wrong with it, but because all he says to introduce the planet is that it's a desert world, and he gives you a little bit of fluff about the kind of village that they have there. Well, that's all perfectly fine, but in the old book, listen to this. It was a vast, shining globe, and it cast a light of lambent topaz into space. But it was not a sun. Thus, the planet had fooled men for a long time. Not until entering close orbit around it did its discoverers realise that this was a world in a binary system, and not a third sun itself. At first it seemed nothing could exist on such a planet, least of all humans. Yet both massive G1 and G2 stars orbited a common centre with peculiar regularity, and Tatooine circled them far enough out to permit the development of a rather stable, if exquisitely hot, climate. Mostly this was a dry desert of a world whose unusual star-like yellow glow was the result of double sunlight striking sodium-rich sands and flats. That's the start of chapter 1, and then over in chapter 2 you get, it was an old settler's saying that you could burn your eyes out faster by staring straight and hard at the sun-scorched flatlands of Tatooine than by looking directly at its two huge suns themselves. So powerful was the penetrating glare reflected from those endless wastes. Despite the glare, life could and did exist in the flatlands formed by long evaporated seabeds. And so it goes on. What a loving introduction of the planet, whereas in this book you just get told it's a desert world. I guess because the audience knows about desert worlds now because of Star Wars. Now presumably when Star Wars was made, sort of sci-fi fans were going, I know about this from Dune. But Star Wars, I'm sure you'll agree, is generally where the populace knows knows about desert planets from, if they know about them at all, and so not a great amount of introduction is needed, but he does go off on one a little bit about the kind of wildlife you can find on Jakku, and how it is that the little roly ball BB-8 has to roll around these sort of bird things instead of crushing them, because they're actually used for meat, they're actually et, so people wouldn't like it if they were all found, crushed. Not foreseeing, presumably, the sort of miniature internet trend of wondering, or rather celebrating the fact that we don't know about BB-8's gender. Alan calls it a he. So in that scene, BB-8 spots that there's something approaching the planet, and he goes off to warn people. And then we get the next scene. Poe Dameron's intro starts on page 13. It's the scene where he's with Lawsan Tekka, the old guy. Now, at this point in the film, everything's happening so quickly that there isn't really very much to say about it, but I am interested in something that's in the book here. In the third paragraph down on page 14, we get a hint that Poe Dameron might know a bit more about the Force than I got the sense of from the film. Lawsan Tekka says to him, without the Jedi there can be no balance in the Force and all will be given over to the dark side. And then it says, though Poe was reasonably secure in his knowledge of such things, he was also intelligent enough to know he could not begin to discuss them in depth with someone like Lawsan Tekka. Now what does that tell us? It gives us a sense that he knows quite a bit about the Force, which I don't remember him talking about the Force at all in the film, so this is news to me that he knows really about it. I wasn't really thinking about this clearly enough at the time, but that scene where Rey says to Han Solo, all that stuff, the Force, the Jedi, and he goes, it's true, all of it. Did she say the Force in that? Because if so, then that would imply that the Force is something, kind of mythical that not everybody knows about, and certainly nobody really believes was there. Even though we watched the original trilogy and we went through that journey, the general people of the galaxy, they didn't see Luke training in Dagobah. They don't know what that was all about, so they don't know any more than like Han Solo did at the beginning of the film. Or Luke, who'd never even heard of it at all. Here's Poe, who's reasonably secure in his knowledge of such things being the Force and the dark side of the Force and what it can take over when. Now, presumably what this actually means is that that's just this is the knowledge you get to know when you work for Leia. But, it might be interesting. But the really interesting bit is he couldn't begin to discuss them in depth with someone like Lawsan Tekka. Now, in this particular case, what is someone like Lawsan Tekka? What is he like? There's a lot of respect from here. Poe looks up to him as this big-time guy in the fight between good and evil, and you really get the sense that he's had a real, career behind him. He was the hero of the last 30 years. He looks like Obi-Wan, and you can't help but think of him as having been the equivalent of, young Obi-Wan 30 years ago. So one of the earliest emerging heroes after the events of Return of the Jedi, I get the sense is who he is. But perhaps we'll find out another time, perhaps we won't. There's an emphasis on Leia really not liking being called Princess. Wonder why that is. Is it just because of her fighting spirit? She wants to be thought of as General Organa? Or is it because of Alderaan? Is it because, being addressed as a princess reminds her of that? Or is it because of Han? I mean, didn't he used to call her your worshipfulness, or whatever it was he called her? Do you remember Han's old catchphrase? Excuse me, princess? Well, as we're going to find out, their relationship sort of crumbled, so maybe that's why she doesn't like being called princess. Here's a good line. Turn to page 14 if you own this book. Poe had his quadnux in his hands even before he stopped running. Then BB-8 shows up and something I didn't like happens. Ugh, look at it. Oh dear, look. Ugh. This will be a rather nice thing to a lot of old school Star Wars fans who remember that C-3PO and R2-D2 is often spelled like this. And presumably Foster's Star Wars was the first time that appeared in print. So it's a bit of another callback to his old book really, which I think is quite nice, but I don't like it. I never liked it with C-3PO and R2-D2. R2-D2 that seems okay, but it always rubbed me the wrong way that they spelt C-3PO as S-E-E, 3PO. I'm not bothered about the 3PO part, and in fact, actually I like that part. The word 3 in it is spelt 3, but see? As you see with your eyes? That's a word! I think maybe it was just because the word that they used to describe the sound see starts with an S instead of a C. But it might be because, I was reading a real word on the page, so it's C-3PO. C-3PO run. And now here we are again with BB-8. Ate. Consumed. I feel like they should have just put BB and then the number 8 in letters, E-I-G-H-T. Why not that? Right, there's something interesting on page 17 that I made a note of. Yeah, here we go. The part where the injured stormtrooper reaches up and he smears the bloody handprint down Finn's helmet. Well, that's different in the book. He still gets marked, his face mask gets marked with blood, but it's just a splatter. It just says that essentially the dying guy kind of flails in a bit of a death throw, and some blood goes on him. There's no mention of the hand touching the face or smearing it at all. And doesn't that strike you as interesting? Because that implies that based on the screenplay that Alan Dean Foster was reading at the time, it just said that blood marked the helmet somehow. It doesn't say anything about it being marked by a hand, which is odd because you do have the exposed hand and you do have it reaching up for him. Perhaps I won't know unless I actually get to see the actual screenplay that this was written from, but it gives me the impression that maybe the idea of having the hand touch the face and leave the mark that way was like a later decision made by the director, you know, as opposed to just getting some blood on his helmet somehow to mark him out visually from the other stormtroopers. And if that's the case, then it suddenly makes that moment a lot more worth sort of concentrating on, because I'd thought about this before, but suddenly this image starts to look like a more deliberate mirror of the film's later hand-to-face moment. Now, why would that be? Is it just to establish a recurring image? Because that's good in films by itself. Or is it because there's actually some connection between this scene and the other one? It makes you think about it a little bit, and what I came up with is, well, in both cases, the person whose face is touched is on a journey from one side of the Force to the other, or just from the general side of good and evil if you don't think the Force is involved. And in both cases, the face touch moment seems to be like a pivotal moment on that journey for them. And although it doesn't actually happen until his next big scene, Kylo's face is marked as well shortly afterwards, so both characters are touched on the face and marked. Might be nothing, might be nothing, might be something. The last line of this scene is fantastic. Square brackets, Finn, end square brackets, nodded in recognition and hurried off, wondering what the arrival of that singular figure, Kylo Ren, might portend, but not daring to inquire. For an ordinary trooper like him, ignorance was not simply an abstract value, it was in the manual. I like that, that's cool. On page 19 we begin the confrontation between Kylo Ren and Lord San Tekka. Now when I was watching the film I wasn't really paying attention to what they were saying to each other, I don't think. I kind of saw it as just like, you know, bad guy, good guy dialogue. Ah, I see it is you. We meet again. You've changed much since the days of But now that I know, you know, what the setup is and how the rest of the story goes, and now that I know who Kylo Ren is, suddenly this is a much more interesting scene for me, and I'm looking forward to seeing it in the film again to find out to what extent the actors actually, like, play the fact that they know each other. Tekka would have known him before he was Kylo Ren, because it seems like he knows Leia, so they probably go back a long way. Now, I have the sense that maybe the dialogue as presented in this book is a little bit more explicitly about the fact that they knew each other than it was in the film, but maybe not. I'll watch it again, I'll find out. I don't know what the implication is on page 21, and I can't remember if this is in the film. Don't turn a simple transaction, says Kylo Ren, into a tragedy for these people. Hasn't your presence here done enough for them already? And this suggests he's not talking about the current raid, and especially in a moment that's going to be focused by Tekka's reply. It sounds like something about Tekka being in this town has been causing problems for the locals in a general sense for quite a while. And his reply is, I made my peace with these folk and this place long ago. So I wonder what that means. I wonder what the problem is with Tekka being on this planet. Maybe it's just that they've been invaded a number of times because of his presence there, but I don't think so. I get the impression that this is happening because they've now figured out that he's got this map. Because everyone's after Luke. That's what everyone's looking for. So if they knew he had it before, then they would have come down and probably killed him before and taken it away. It doesn't take a lot of effort on their part this time, so I don't know what the problem was before. So I get the sense that, I don't know, we might be talking about some more backstory stuff that we're going to find out about another time. Unless that was a line just invented for the book and it's actually nothing. Then Tekka says, to turn away from your heritage is the true tragedy. Now I don't remember anything quite so heavy-handed in this scene in the film about who Kylo Ren is and who his parents are, but maybe there was. Maybe I need to just concentrate anymore. Have any of you seen it more recently? You can remember. And that, then, is the first chapter of The Force Awakens. Join me again for Chapter 2, in which we finally meet Rey, the main character in the film. I wonder if there'll be anything about her in the book that isn't sort of put forward in the film, because she is an enigma in the film. She is a real mystery. Everything about her is really, really secretive, to the point where it's actually been detrimental to the film's reviews, because there's a lot of people out there saying that things that I think were hinted at very subtly or sort of deliberately skirted over in order to keep her enigmatic, people have been saying that those things weren't in the film, and that was flaw, and that they should have been. Specifically, they're making the assumption that none of this is information that exists, and so we just should take the character as she is, and that what that means is that she's someone who suddenly comes into a great deal of magical power way too quickly for the story to quite work. I personally think that there's going to be more to it than that, and that there's backstory written here that supports it all, and I think there's a lot of hints towards that in the film. But We'll find out when episode 8 comes out, and maybe we'll find out in her chapters in this book. I look forward to finding out if we find out. So, there we go, The Force Awakens. Join me then for chapter 2 another time. Goodbye! www.youtube.com/TeamTomato Day.